All right, so I'm just going to do a little crash course in your cereal heads today. So first off, we're going to talk about oats. Oats is your panicle inflorescence. You can tell it's a panicle because of the branches. So anything that has a branch in the grass family is going to be your panicle. And then each spikelet is going to be attached by that little stem right here, which is called the pedicel. So the pedicel attaches to the branch, and then this whole part is going to be your panicle inflorescence. This stem, again, going to be your peduncle. The peduncle is what's going to hold up the entire inflorescence. And then the spikelet in oats, so one spikelet here. The big stripy pieces, those are your glumes, and they're going to be quite large and uneven in size. And then inside those glumes, there's going to be three florets technically. So there's one of them. There'll be two, one in each glume, and then the third one is going to be very, very small in the center and going to be sterile. So 3 florets per spikelet, middle one being sterile and small. And then the seeds in oats are going to look like this. So they're going to be kind of your more long oval seeds. You can tell usually the difference between tame oat and wild oat seeds. Tame oat are usually always this color. Wild oat are going to be more darker colored, and wild oat will usually have pubescence and that curved on, whereas tame oats won't have pubescence and they don't have any awns. So that is oat. Wheat heads look like this. Now wheat can be bearded or not bearded. Bearded, we're talking about the awns. So again, the awn is always going to come off of the lemma. In durum varieties, they're always going to have awns. Durum varieties are typically always bearded. But in wheat, you're only going to have one spikelet per rachis node. So again, the rachis being the central point of that inflorescence to which all those spikelets attach to. And because this is a spike inflorescence, everything is sessile. So what we're looking at here is, if I can get it to focus, one spikelet. So in wheat, one spikelet is going to have up to 5 florets. Okay, so we say up to 5 florets because sometimes there's only 3 florets, sometimes there's 4, but the last one will always be sterile. And then the seeds will get smaller the further you get into the spikelet. So the first seed will be the biggest, the second one will be slightly smaller, third being smaller, etc., etc. Sorry, this is going to be really hard to focus here. So this here is going to be one spikelet. So there we are. So this one is going to have 4. So you can see we've got 3 big ones, and then your 4th is going to be tucked in nice and small. So that is your wheat heads there. Now the seeds in wheat are going to look like this. So this is hard red spring wheat. So they're going to have kind of that reddish brown color. But wheat is typically those little round oval seeds. And again, hard red spring going to be more redder color. Something like your amber durum would be more of your amber color, but they're always going to have that shape, and typically they'll have that little line on the other side. So that's going to tell you that it is wheat. Now we're going to talk about the barleys next. So there are 2 different kinds of barley. You have 2-row barley, which is going to be this one, and 6-row barley, which is going to be this one. Now 2-row barley and 6-row barley are named not because of you plant them in rows of 2 or plant them in rows of 6, but it's because of how the spikelets are arranged. So if you look at 2-row barley, they're arranged in 2 rows. So you've got one coming off of that side, one coming off of that side. So there's 2 rows of spikelets, where in your 6-row barley, you're going to have 3 on the front and 3 on the back. So that's going to be 6 rows of kernels going up and down the heads. Now barley is a little bit different because barley is going to have 3 spikelets per rachis node. Everything else is only going to have 1 spikelet per rachis node, whereas barley is going to have 3. So in your 6-row barley, you can see here, this is 1 rachis node. So you've got 1, 2, and 3 on the other side. Now these little white pieces at the bottom, those are going to be your glumes. Typically they have little tiny awns on them. You can see one of the awns sticking up there off the glumes. But again, 3 spikelets per rachis node, so 1, 2, and 3 on the other side there. And each one of those spikelets is only going to have 1 floret. So there will only be one floret per spikelet. So sometimes in barley, florets and spikelets get used interchangeably just because there is only the one floret inside. Now barley is going to have a huge lemma on coming off of it, and they're usually rough. So that means that they're going to have little kind of jabby hairs that will jab into your fingers. They can be smooth. It just depends on the type that you're growing. So that's your 6-row barley. Now 2-row barley is only going to have 2 rows of kernels. And the reason that happens is because you have 2 sterile spikelets at each rachis nude. So it's hard to do with one hand. On your 2-row barley, you can see this little guy here that I'm playing with my thumbnail. That is 1 sterile floret. Then you have the fertile one in the center, and then you have your sterile one on the other side. So you can tell that they're spikelets because they're each still all going to have their own set of little narrow glooms. You can see some of the glooms hanging out there with their little awns on them. But again, still 3 spikelets per rachis node, but 2 of them are sterile. So 1 sterile, 1 fertile, and then 1 sterile on the other side. Okay, so that is your barley heads. Now the seeds of barley can be hulled or hullless. So that means that a lot of the time that they keep the lemma and the palea attached to them. Okay, so here are what the seeds look like. So the difference between 2-row and 6-row barley, 2-row barley is going to be a lot more uniform in shape. Okay, so that's your 2-row there. 6-row barley is going to be more variable in shape. So you're going to have larger kernels mixed in with the smaller kernels. And that just comes from how it's grown. 2-row barley, only 1 seed is being produced per node. So all the nutrients are going into 1 seed, which makes it more uniform, whereas 6-row barley, you've got 3 seeds being produced per nodes, so usually 1 is going to be bigger, and then the 2 side ones are typically going to be a little bit smaller. But again, you can tell it's barley because you can see that hull is still on there. Okay, so the lemma and the palea are attached. All right. Now rye is typically going to be a little bit more of a bluish green color. It's also going to have little kind of thinner heads, and rye is different because it needs to open up for pollination, and that's why rye is susceptible to ergots, because the lemma and the palea have to open right up, and those to get cross pollination in there. So when the rye or the spikelet opens right up, that means that it's a little bit more susceptible for things to come in. Now rye typically goes quite tall because of that cross-pollination as well. But rye, again, is only going to have 1 spikelet per rachis node. So there's your spikelet hanging out there. And rye typically has smaller glooms. So there's little kind of lighter colored things running up the center here. Those are the glooms. So I picked one out there. So that's 1. So they are smaller. And rye, again, is going to have 3 florets per spikelet. So there's 1 spikelet in there. And there's going to be 3 florets in there. 2 are going to be fairly equal in size, and the 3rd one is going to be very, very small and sterile. So that's one of the big lemmas there that I'm picking out. Again, rye is one of the crops that the lemma and the palea are going to be able to come right apart from one another because it needs to open right up for cross-pollination. So that's a lemma, and that little thin one is a gloom. Okay, so that's rye. And typically the seeds of rye are going to have a little bit more of a bluish green color to them. So those are your rye seeds. They're going to be a little bit more longer, oval shaped than wheat, but not quite as long oval shaped as oats. Okay, so that is your rye. Triticale is going to look very, very similar to wheat. So triticale is a cross between wheat and rye. So it looks more so like wheat than it does like rye. So it's going to be very similar to wheat, having your 5 florets per spikelet, at 5 maximum, I should say. So there's your 1 spikelet right here. We can get it peeled off. There's 1 spikelet. Okay, so there's your 1 gloom on that side, gloom on the other side, spikelet in the middle. Again, up to 5 florets per spikelet, and then one is always going to be sterile, just like in wheat. It kind of looks like wheat on steroids, so everything's a little bit bigger. And then what we're looking at on the stem here, that's going to tell you that it's triticale. Whoops, out of focus. That's going to tell you that it is triticale versus wheat. So you can see on the stem here, you have heavily pubescence on the peduncle. Okay, so that's going to tell you that that is, there you go, you can kind of see it there. So that's going to tell you that it is triticale versus wheat, because again, that pubescence, triticale, if we look back at the wheat here, no pubescence, okay? So wheat there, triticale there with the pubescence. Okay, so that's the difference between the two of them. Keep in mind this wheat seed is a little bit more, or this wheat head is a little bit more full than the triticale, but again, triticale is usually a little bit beefier than wheat. And then a lot of the times triticale heads are pendulous, so they'll kind of kick off to one side. And then the seeds of triticale look very similar to, they have kind of the shape of rye, but the color of wheat. Okay, so there's your triticale seeds, and if we compare them with your rye and your wheat, you can kind of see the difference between the three of them. So rye being this one, triticale being this one, and wheat being this one. So again, triticale, typically the shape of rye, but the color of wheat. All right. And then the last one we'll just talk about very quickly is your canary seed. Your canary seed is going to be your spike-like panicle. Again, looks like a spike, but if you get all up in here, there's going to be little tiny branches in there. Canary seed is kind of a niche crop. It's grown for bird seed. But again, there is the heads, spike-like panicles, and then the seeds of canary seed are going to look like this. So again, we've talked about how sometimes canary seed gets confused with flax a little bit, just because it's shiny, the shape is very different, and the color is very different, but people see that small shiny seed and sometimes get it confused with flax. So you can see the shape is a little bit more oval, flax is a little bit more round, but again, shiny and small. So that is cereal heads in a nutshell.